Let's take a look at conditionals now. And like any language, we also have conditionals. There's some subtle differences with conditionals, which we'll see in a moment. But I can do, for example, an if statement, and let's say, for example, if my string is not empty, let's go ahead and create this my string, and we'll create it a var because otherwise it wouldn't make sense. We'll say not empty right now. So we've got my string is not empty, and we can see that I can write whatever print line, not empty. You can add an else statement, of course, print line is empty. So all that kind of like similar to all other languages, and of course I can do an else if my string starts with, for instance, an A, and then do more else blocks. So very similar to everything else. Nothing extraordinary here. Now, one thing that is different, though, is that an if is an expression, can be used as an expression. Here it is basically a statement, but I can use it as an expression as well. So if I were to do, for instance, let's remove this else if over here and just leave it at 2 levels. Remove this as well. So I can actually assign a value to this and say, for instance, value result equals. Now, what's going to happen if we actually run this? Let's go ahead and do a print result and see what happens. So we're running this, and it's going to say Kotlin unit. Why Kotlin unit? Because Kotlin unit, it actually, we'll see later on that it's the kind of like the equivalent of a void that you have in many languages. In Kotlin, we have Kotlin.unit or unit. But it's interesting that I said that the if conditional can be an expression. So what is this unit that it's returning? Well, Kotlin allows an if to return a value, and by default it's going to return the value on the last line of that expression. So let's remove this print line and say not empty, and then let's go ahead and remove this one and say it's empty. Okay, now let's see what happens. Not empty. Okay, so it is now returning the last value of the expression. So if I put a 20 here, what will happen? Let's run it, and it returns a 20. If I put a 30 here, what's going to happen? Well, it's going to return 20. But notice that the IDE's kind of gone funny on us. Here it's saying the expression is not used. Obviously, I could just do print line, and now it is used, so I'll get rid of that warning. But here it's saying kind of something strange. What's happening here? Because if you look at it, this doesn't really make sense. And sure, it doesn't, because we're saying that if it's true, if the condition matches, then return a number. If it doesn't, then return a string. So Kotlin, basically what it's saying to you here, the IDE is basically saying that it's casting the result of this expression to any. Any, as we'll see, is a top-level object of any class in Kotlin. So it's the equivalent to object in Java or in C#. In Kotlin, it's any. But what it's saying is kind of giving you a warning and saying, do you realize that your if expression is returning an integer in some cases or a string in other cases? If you're fine with that, great. If not, you should do something about it. But important here is that we can actually return an expression, we can actually return a value from an if expression. What happens if I remove this else block? You see that I get an error. And it's saying you're using if as an expression and you don't have an else. In saying like, I don't know what to do if that expression isn't true. What am I meant to return? If I remove this line, we can see that it's still giving us the problem because it's interpreting this as a unit. The issue is that we're assigning it to a value. It's become an expression. Now it removes that warning. But as soon as we add it, it's going to say, nope, I need an else statement here because otherwise I don't know what value to return. Now, much like conditionals for if, we can also have when statements, which is the equivalent of kind of like a case in Kotlin in other languages. So I can do when, and then let's say result, and here I can do multiple things. So I could say, for example, when result is string, print line, excellent. Now, here again it says it's incompatible. Why? Because it's not a string. So I can make this a string and do an else, another string. And you can see that now I can do this check. When result is string. When result is value, then print line, it's a value. So notice that the when statement isn't limited to just saying, okay, I have a value, and if that value is if it's a string, if it contains this element, or if it contains if it contains this value, or if it contains that value, and do a comparison of string to string. I can actually do different varied comparisons. It's kind of like pattern matching, right? I can, in a sense, say, okay, well, the result I can check whether it's a string or whether it contains a value, and then execute that block. So let's go ahead and run this and see what happens. So if I say, for example, let's actually remove this and make it just very simple and say, for example, value. Let's see what happens if we run this. Let's execute this, and it says excellent. Why? Because it is a string. Okay. So let's move this up, and let's see what happens now. It's a value. And that's giving you an idea of what's happening. It's actually breaking out of that statement, right? So it's not going down all of the different whens. It's just going to break out. If we want to have multi-line, we can do that also. So we can say print line, second statement, and run that, and it'll execute those two. But it will never get to the next one. It's found its condition, it does it, it executes, and it leaves. So you don't need a break like you would in some other languages. Now here's another curiosity. When can also be used as an expression, right? So I can say val when value equals. And let's do a print line when value. Now notice here that it is giving me an error. And it says when expression must be exhaustive, add necessary else branch. Again, it's the same situation as the if. It says, okay, you're using this as an expression. I know what to do when it's a value. I know what to do when it's a string. What about other situations? How do I handle that? So I can add an else branch and say, well, print line, it came to this. And let's run that, and we see that when it's a value. Now, so it's printing, it's a value, and then it's printing the second statement. And again, we go back to Kotlin unit, because I'm not returning an actual value. I'm returning the equivalent of unit, the equivalent of void. So I can say returning from first when case, and run that. And we can see that now it's returned that value. And again, it's kind of like giving me this warning, the IDE saying that, okay, here you're returning a string, here you're returning a unit, which basically means kind of like, an object. So I'm casting this to any. I can just remove that and do the same thing here so that each one returns a string, and you'll see that we'll get rid of this warning is now gone. So there we go. So now since each branch returns a string, we no longer have that compiler warning.